details. I mean, this is not my strong suit. Madam.
I'm not sure. They might also be on iTunes Music.
There could be an iTunes. Some people from out of the country get some of these lectures, I know, from iTunes. I mean, we will research. I mean, I thought you. Why are you asking me this? You were the experts of this kind of stuff. But we will produce some general statement on the subject and send it out as a thing to you soon. But easily accessible, you will have the lectures and so forth. Okay? Now, I just wanted to say one more thing about my office hours to make this clear. So I have it's on the syllabus, but I wanted to just point out to you, to remind you. So it says Wednesday 2 to 4, and that's in my office in this building, one floor down. And I know this building is impossible, but this is actually, my office is pretty easy because it's right by the elevator. And at 3123. So I'm just one floor down. But after the class on Thursdays, I'm going to informal office hours, which means not to talk about your personal questions, but just generally to talk about whatever interests you with the course at the Free Speech Cafe, which is just to the north of here at Moffett. If you guys are new on campus, Free Speech Cafe has that wonderful array of the newspapers of the world in front. So you can rotate so you can see newspapers from all over the world once every 10 days, a bunch of 5 papers a day. So you see maybe 50 papers over the course of. So that's where it is. Everyone clear where that is? And I'm going to go over after this. I'm going to get a coffee and something to eat, and then out on the terrace. So we just got to find each other. Okay? And if you need to talk to me outside of those office hours, you have my email. Okay. Moving right along, I want to talk to you about some key keywords and compounds of these keywords. So the first keyword is obviously human. So we get sort of 3 general versions of how we understand the term human. One is a naturalistic view, or biological view, that human refers to some biological quality that we have that distinguishes us from creatures that are not human. It's essentially a material account. The second version of human is philosophical, idealistic account. Something that depends on something not material, and you would call this a soul, or an entelechy, or some version of something that makes us human, that's essential, but not of a material quality. And this is obviously important both in religious traditions, but also in philosophical traditions that grow out of Plato. And then there's a kind of mixed version of those, which grows again out of a Greek philosophical tradition associated with Aristotle, about whom more later in the next lecture, that the soul is the form of a body. We're physically different from each other. I mean, if you look around the room, we're different, but we have a form that makes us of the human species. So we need both the body and the soul to be fully human. They don't exist independently of each other, but the commonality of our physical being is this core of humanness. Is that sort of version? Now, from that, here's a sort of representations of that. That I can show you this from a plaque that was put in the 1973 spacecraft. It's a totally we'll come back to that near the end of the course. It's a totally fascinating notion. What should you send up in space to make them think of us as human? So they sent up calculations of pi. They sent up parts of the B minor mass. I mean, it's sort of hard to know what would space people make of the B minor mass. Since I don't know what many people in this world would make of the B minor mass. Just music of other cultures is actually pretty hard to figure out. But be that as it may, that's what we sent up. And one thing we sent up was this and this is a disintegration pattern of an atom. But one of the things they sent up is this idea of humans. And so there's a form of a human that they thought would be represented to space creatures who might find the spacecraft. And that's the kind of thing I'm getting at. Some version of the human is maybe something essential that anyone's going to understand. This is human. That also became an important sort of feature in post-World War II anti-racist art, and was actually importantly in the aesthetic and philosophical background of the Universal Declaration. I just show you this from one art exhibit called The Family of Man, which toured the world and was a bestseller in many of the countries of the world, East as well as West. And the point of these illustrations is to show you this notion, core to the human rights idea, that either physically or spiritually, or in some combination of the physical and the spiritual, there's something that makes all humans human. So it's a big collection, but I just show you a few of these pictures just to get you an idea. You notice explicitly different races and different classes being represented, and we'll see more of these later on. But that's the point I'm trying to get at. Now, from this notion of the human, however defined as a physical, as a spiritual, or as some combination of these, grows a kind of political universalism. That is, that all men are blank. So, famously from our Declaration of Independence, which you are reading this week, it says all men are created equal. The document we'll discuss next week, it's on your reader, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizens, speaks of all men have these claims. The Universal Declaration claims of all men. It's universal. So it's making a political claim based on a claim about humans. So qua being human, there are these universal universal rights. So, just to give you some examples, that we hold these truths that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We'll unpack that phrase as the course goes in the next week and a half. But right now, I just want you to notice the claim, all men, which is this broad men standing in for human. Though that will be problematic as well as you think. But we'll get to that. So just to fast forward to 1996, the Republic of South Africa in the post-apartheid era defines itself as one sovereign democratic state based on the following: human dignity. Right? So in other words, human is an adjective describing dignity. What kind of dignity? It's really dignity appropriate to humans as a category, with no subsections of humans. And it presumes then there is such a thing as this human. And then it spells some of that. It spells some of that out. And here you see again the notion of universal adult suffrage. All people have this sort of claim of suffrage. And in this. So there's the political universalism that grows out of this idea of the human. But there's also an allied ethical universalism, which ethical universalism of a historically particular sort. Now, this holds that it's based on this sort of definition. It's relatively recent. It says basically that all victims, all people, are and ought to be subject to our care, and that we owe some obligation to these people without regard to the political, social, and other facts about them. So it's not just a claim for political rights, as you see in the Declaration of Independence or in the Constitution, but it's from out of human grows an idea of a universal ethical claim. You understand the distinction that I'm trying to make? So humanitarianism stands, it's something that's a higher order almost. It doesn't claim that a particular polity guarantees these rights. It claims that in general, we owe this ethical obligation. So it allows, it invites people to see, who need care, everywhere about them. One has to be on the side of those who suffer. Now, this is the world, in some sense, in which, at some level, we live. This is the world in which we're all accustomed to seeing people suffer in parts of the world in which, even 50 years ago, we wouldn't know much. But as you'll see when we talk about the course, before the late 18th century, we'd almost know nothing. In other words, if you were living in America at the time of the Declaration of Independence, you wouldn't have a clue that people are suffering anywhere. Maybe in the next country. There's an earthquake in Lisbon, you'd hear about it. But you'd have no idea that people were suffering anywhere else. Just because of... Now we know that people suffer everywhere instantly. And we all are used to these. In fact, we somehow become overly used to them, since we all know what it is, human suffering picture looks like. There's almost and you'll see how, I'll show you the origin of this. The starving child picture has its origins in the middle of the 19th century. And I'll show you pictures that will be identical to Holocaust children, to Biafran children, to Indian children, to Chinese children, to Somalian children. There's a genre now of this that we'll look at. But I'm just going to give you some examples. This is what I mean. Searching for survivors, I don't have to put in where it is. The flood, right? This could be Bangladesh. I don't even know where this is probably not Bangladesh. I think it's the Mississippi. But the fact that I don't know makes the point. So, that notion that we have a series of images before us that is a relatively I want to argue is a notion that has religious deeper origins. That'll be my next lecture, but has a sort of specificity in the 18th century. And that's going to be lecture 5 when I talk about the specific history of the humanitarian impulse. Okay, so far then we've had this notion of human, and something political follows from it, or it's said to follow from it, and something ethical is said to follow from it. Now, let me talk briefly about the difficulties with this. Well, one thing is that, and you've already thought of this, maybe nothing follows from someone being just human. Why would one treat someone or everyone in a certain way, or give them particular, just because they are like us featherless bipeds? I mean, that's a very minimal notion of likeness. And in fact, historically, as you'll see in a moment, and you'll see much more during the course, almost nothing has in fact followed for people's regarding someone as just human, as just biological, or even as just ensouled as human. So that's the first point. In fact, there's not a very good philosophical reason why something could follow from it, and in fact, historically, very little has followed from it. There's a second point that's maybe more striking, that nothing ought to follow it. Serious people have claimed that the universal abstract principle of human, qua some abstract notion of the human, of the sort I told you, as in human rights, is simply wrong. It's conceptually mixed up. So there's the utilitarian claim that there are no principles that should not be subject to the greatest happiness or the greatest number principle. That's made subtle by these guys. None of these serious utilitarians will say that we ought to torture someone in order to make some other people happy.